This is For the Governed, a podcast series brought to you by Athalonz. Here are your hosts, Tim Markison and Ron Cates.
Welcome to another interesting and exciting episode of the Athalonz podcast, For the Governed. I'm Ron, this is Tim. Now, Tim, not everybody knows this, but you are a really good baseball. Well, here's what not everybody knows. Tim is one of the country's leading patent attorneys. But how he got there, starting out wanting to be a full-time professional baseball player, going from that to renowned patent attorney, that's a sort of a twist. There's some twists in this story. Why don't you bring us up to speed?
Sure. So I'm a big believer in fate. Like you mentioned, I grew up wanting to be a baseball player. That's pretty much all I cared about, read about, played, dreamt about being a baseball player. And it helped me get through a very difficult childhood. So, and I was always young for the grade I was in. So my birthday was like right before the cutoff, before it was the next. So started kindergarten at 4. I was 17 when I started college.
Well, that means you were always the little guy, though.
Yes. Although even though I was the little guy, I was still like the best baseball player in my town from my age bracket, and usually the next age up. So I got a lot of attention that way, and it really was fostering my dream of being a professional baseball player. And so when I was in college, I had a pretty decent junior year, but didn't raise a lot of attention. But my senior year, I really, really excelled. I was a left-handed, and I pitched. And I was, for the most part, unhittable. I had a 0.17 ERA, didn't lose a game. I was striking out about 1.5 strikeouts per inning. So I was doing really well. Had decent control, good curveball. So, for high school kids with a good curveball and somewhat decent control, it makes it really hard to hit. So at the end of my senior year, I got invited to a tryout with the White Sox, and that went really well. But at the end of the day, the scout I was working with said, I'm much better off going to college than into professional baseball. And I'm like, well, no, I want to play ball. I don't want to go to college. But he said,
and at this point, you were not the best student either. Am I correct?
That is true. I did not apply myself. So if I couldn't get the homework done in class or in my one study hall, I didn't do it. And then I never studied for an exam. So I was a B- student in high school.
You were studying baseball. That was that's all that mattered, right?
That was it. Yep. So after the tryout with the White Sox, I decided, what, I'll go to college so I can continue to pursue my dream of baseball. And, at the time I had no real guidance. And since I hadn't any plans of going to college and never really looked at it, I had no idea there was a difference in level of play at college. I didn't know the difference between D1, junior college, D2, all those different things. And I had a couple scholarships to a couple of D2 schools. I had a partial scholarship to a D1 school, but it was like, how am I going to afford any of those? And since to me college was college, I decided to go to the local junior college. So during that summer between ending high school and starting college, I was playing American Legion ball, and we played on some really crappy fields. And I was running sprints at the end of practice along with the rest of my teammates. And as I was slowing, my right heel spike caught a gopher hole and just snapped me. Felt like I was cut in half. I went down, excruciating pain, had to be carried off the field. But then, so this is 1979. So, I didn't get taken to the doctor, didn't go to the ER.
Walk it off, put some dirt on it?
Yeah, basically rub it in the dirt and suck it up. That was kind of the mentality. And then, but a few days later, I still couldn't move, was in a lot of pain. So my parents took me to a chiropractor. So no x-rays, no anything, just said, oh yeah, you just kind of pulled something in your back here, snapped me, and heard this big pop, and he says, you'll be fine in a couple of weeks. I didn't find out till about 3 years later that incident, I actually herniated 3 discs in my lower back. So I got back to playing, but I still wasn't right because I was still in pain. I was stiff. So I just didn't have the velocity that I had prior to the injury. So we were playing at a tournament. So I lived in Northern Illinois, and we were playing in a tournament in upstate Wisconsin, so about 3.5 hours from home. And I was pitching the first game and doing fairly well. And on a third or fourth inning, I threw a fastball, and it was right down the middle. Batter squared it up and line drive right at my nose, and I got my glove coming up, and the ball just right over the top of the glove into my nose. Down I went. Blood was gushing everywhere. I'm crawling around trying to find the ball.
This is a memorable season so far.
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah, it's a great season.
This is one of your favorite years ever.
Yeah. So, again, in true fashion of the 1970s mentality, I just rub it in the dirt. So I sat on the bench with an ice pack on my face for the rest of that game, and then we had a game after that and for the 3-hour ride home. I don't remember anything after crawling around on the field looking for the ball. But that pretty much ended that season. And then, when I went to college, it was junior college, and it was like, what was I going to study? So I was always good at math and science. That just kind of came naturally to me. And then I was working as a draftsman. Again, this is 1979, where I actually used pencil and paper to draw. CAD programs didn't exist at the time. And I was working for a company that was making battery chargers for battery backup systems at nuclear power plants. And it'd be kind of nice to know how those things worked. So it's like, all right, I think I'll study electrical engineering. So that's how I chose electrical engineering, was from that.
Now, was this because you really had a natural curiosity in what you were doing at work, or just because you had to pick something?
Basically, I had to pick something. And like I said, I was good at math and science, and then I kind of wanted to know how that stuff worked. So, no real passion to learn this, or I wasn't compelled. I never did any tinkering as a kid. It was just, it'd be kind of nice to know how that stuff worked. And still, I was going to be a baseball player, so I just needed to study something at college. And something inside me clicked, and I still need to kind of really think this through. I still haven't quite figured out what clicked, but all of a sudden I started to apply myself in school. And I was pulling straight A's in all these pre-engineering classes. And in a lot of classes, not only was I getting an A, but I was had the highest grade in class, which was completely foreign to me.
You're getting a lot of positive feedback.
Yeah.
And it's quite objective, so that's good. No one around you can diminish it. It's got to be very rewarding.
Well, it was, but being a baseball player, I was always viewed as the dumb jock in the family. So it was like, my father in particular was like, gee, they must have really watered down the classes when I tried going to engineering school. My father flunked out in his sophomore year. So it couldn't be that I was smart. It just had to be the curriculum has gotten a whole lot easier in 20 years. So it still had that kind of, love-hate kind
You're
of
still a little tainted. Yeah, I get it.
So, it couldn't be because I was actually smart. It had to be something else. And then, so started the spring season of baseball. We're into game 4, I think, and I'm playing first base, and I go up to catch a high throw. I land with my right foot on the base, and my left foot missed, and my back went again. So 4 games into my first season of college, I was done. And then that summer, my wife and I, we got married. She was 18 in a week, and I was 18 in 9 months when we got married. We started dating when she was 15 and I was 16, and we knew pretty instantly, within weeks, that we were going to get married. So we got married at 18. And that was a little over 40 years ago, and we're still married. So
that worked out pretty well.
Yeah, so I'm really
That's
proud.
one in the win column.
Yeah.
Even out of this very bad year, something amazing happened.
Yeah, so I'm really proud of that and all we've been through. So into my sophomore year, again, I was doing really well with the schoolwork, and then same thing into the spring baseball season. I was pitching, and felt a pop in my shoulder because I just didn't have that flexibility and range of motion I had prior to the back injury. And then, similar kind of thing. I was running to cover first base and hit the base wrong or just a little awkwardly, and my back went out again. So that season was over a handful of games into the season. So, but I still didn't give up on the dream of playing baseball. So after 2 years of junior college, I transferred to Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago and tried to play baseball there, but I was done. I was 19 years old. My shoulder was messed up. My back was messed up. I couldn't play.
You're 19, but your body was like 84.
Yeah. At least my shoulder and my back were. But I continued to do well in school. And then in my senior year, well, it was 5 years to get through engineering program. So in my fifth year, in the spring semester, so my last semester of engineering school, I'm taking 5 senior level engineering classes. And I was interviewing for new jobs. So I was getting out of the place I was working at where I was doing the drafting and got a job at Northrop, where they make defense equipment. And the day I was supposed to start my new job at Northrop, our oldest daughter, Amy, was born. And a couple of days after she was born, the doctor informed us that she had a congenital heart defect, and she had to be taken to Children's Memorial in downtown Chicago. Well, we had grown up in the suburbs of Chicago, so going downtown was a big deal for us. And we didn't know at the time, anything more other than she had this heart issue. She needed to be rushed down to the hospital. And the doctor gave us no indication of whether she was going to survive or not. We found out years later that the surgery that Amy eventually had 8 months later, they had just developed that technique a year earlier. And children a year earlier that were born with Amy's condition had less than a 50% survival rate. But because of the surgery, they had about a 90% survival rate. But we had to wait the 8 months before she could have the surgery because the equipment that they had was too big to operate on an infant. Today, they can do that surgery right when she was born or even before they're born, depending on the nature.
So that's 8 months of just high anxiety, 24/7, yes?
Yeah, it was brutal. And Laura, my wife, was 21 at the time. I was 22. Again, I just started a new job, and I was taking 5 engineering classes.
And you just had a baby.
Yeah.
And now there's all this other, that's huge in and of itself, but now there's some complications.
Yeah.
That's overwhelming.
Yeah, so the first 5 weeks of Amy's life, she was in the neonatal center at Children's Memorial in Chicago. And she would spike fevers, and then she also had severe gastroreflux, which is the opening to her stomach was too large, so anything that she ate just came right back up. So between the heart issue and not being able to keep food in her stomach, it was awful, and they had to constantly adjust her medicines. But finally, at that 5-week period, they figured out the right balance of her medications. So we were able to bring her home. So during that 5-week period, I started my new job, but I stopped going to school because the rest of my time I was at the hospital. And so we get Amy home, and I have to start school up again, plus work. And then our families were not supportive. So it was basically Laura and I.
Just a terrible situation. And not having the support makes it even worse.
Yeah.
Now, I hate to bring this up, but I'm guessing, you're 22 years old, you just started a job, you're in school, the financial burden must have been just mind-boggling.
Yeah. So I was making $18,000 a year. And even with insurance, Amy's medical, the pharmaceuticals for Amy were about $500 a month. So a third of my money every month was going just to buy her medicine.
She was in the hospital for how long?
She was in the hospital for 5 weeks.
So that bill must be which is
It was
astronomical.
It was even with insurance, it was a little over 40 grand.
Oh my goodness.
What our debt was, and then so she was born in February. Her surgery was in October, but while we had her home, we had to constantly check things. A lot of it was looking at her hands and toes. If they started to turn blue, we had to rush her to the hospital because they needed to evaluate her so she'd be admitted again. So that happened about 4 or 5 times over the summer. So it was when I was in the lab and the phone would ring, my heart would.
So remember a few minutes ago, I was talking about that year where you got hurt in baseball. What a terrible year.
Yeah.
That year doesn't look so bad anymore.
No,
compared to this new one.
It's much, much better. That was one of the hardest years of my life and Laura's as well. So a half a dozen times during that summer between when she was born and her surgery, we had to take her to the hospital. They'd admit her and adjust her medication. We'd take her home. So she finally had her surgery in October of '84. So 8 months after she was born, and thank God it was successful. The doctors told us that probably when she hit puberty, she'd have to have that valve replaced. So fortunately, she didn't have to have that replaced until she was 31, which was 5 years ago. So she had that valve replaced 5 years ago, and now she's doing really well. So we got through the surgery. We started to get her weaned off of the feeding system that she had. Again, because of the gastro reflux, she had to have a feeding tube. So she didn't eat normally. So she was actually fed by machine through a feeding tube in her nose. So we got her weaned off of that when she was about a year old. And then don't remember much between year 1 and year 2. And when Amy was about 2.5, we had our second daughter, Patty. So this was the August of '86. And shortly thereafter, we get sued by the hospital for outstanding medical bills. And I didn't know it at the time, but every time we went to the hospital, they opened up a new account. So I had 6 accounts with the hospital. And during that time, we were still really struggling financially.
Well, sure. You're young. You've got 2 kids.
So to go back, just to add to the just how challenging of a year it was. So with that 5 classes I was taking, all of my professors said you should just drop. There's no way you can make up 5 weeks of senior level engineering classes. And I said, this is my last semester. I'm going to try. If I end up failing, I fail. I'll have to take them again, but at least let me try. So they agreed. And one of the classes, so that was a Tuesday. And then he said that Friday we were having a midterm. And I said, well, can I get an extension? He said, no, you have to be ready. So I had from Tuesday to Friday to learn a whole half a semester of, I don't even remember what the class was. And
go to work and take care of 2 kids.
Yeah. Well, just 1 kid at the time,
okay. But
one critically ill child. All I do remember is that I ended up getting the second highest grade in that class. So that said a lot about his teaching abilities. So I get through the semester, and this was 1984. So everything is still paper and pencil. Computers were just starting to be used. And I get my report card, and I got 2 B's and 2 C's and an incomplete. And I'm like, what the hell is this incomplete? I took all my finals. I did all the homework. I did everything I was supposed to do. So I call the university, and the professor is on a sabbatical for the next 3 months. So I can't even get a hold of the professor to find out what happened. And what made this worse is when I took the job with Northrop, I was paid a little over $18,000 a year. But when I got my degree, my pay would go up to $27,000, which is a huge jump.
Sure, that's a gigantic leap.
Because I got the incomplete, they weren't going to, I didn't graduate in their mind, so they wouldn't give me the raise.
And this guy is on sabbatical
till the end of August. So what happened was somehow my final got lost. So when the professor got back, in the end of August, I had to go in and take an oral exam for that class. So I had to relearn a semester's worth of stuff. And I ended up getting a B in that class, but it was just like, my God, what else can go wrong? Now, fast forward, 2 years from there. So I did get my raise, and I had a pretty good work experience. I was doing really well. I was getting the promotions. I was getting the higher end raises. I was put on some really, really good projects at work. So that part of life was going well. We were still really struggling financially when Patty was born in August of '86. And then shortly thereafter, we got sued by the hospital. I started calling around to attorneys to represent us, and they all wanted at least $5,000 retainer just to get started. And I'm like, well, hell, if I had that kind of money, I'd just pay the hospital.
Right? Sure.
I don't deny that I owe it. I just don't have the means to pay it. And then a friend of mine said, you can represent yourself. And, my first thought was, well, no, you got to be smart to be an attorney. Little did I know 30 years later. But I had no choice. So I started going to the Chicago Law Library every night for a month to learn how to to file my answer. And then, so I did all that. And then we had our first hearing. I don't remember exactly how far after the answer was filed, but we get into the courtroom, and it's quite intimidating. First time I've ever been into a courtroom, and our case gets called up, and I go up to the defense table, and the hospital's attorney is at the plaintiff's table, and he starts going in about, what a deadbeat I am, and they've got all these outstanding bills, and we're just not paying them. And, I had some canceled checks. We actually did make some payments, but because we had the 6 accounts, they only were crediting one of the accounts. So it looks like I had 5 accounts that I didn't pay anything on. And then the first one was the biggest. So the judge goes, hey, let's go into my chambers and talk. And so we get into the chambers, and the attorney for the hospital starts going at me again. And the judge just goes, quiet down. And he takes his chair, faces me, and says, how's Amy doing? Hear you had another daughter. How's she's doing? How's work going?
This is like one of the best judges ever.
Yeah. And I told him, and he says, so what can you afford? And I had my spreadsheet, here's the money I make, here's our bills. And there was nothing of thrill on there. I says, literally, we have $20 a month extra. And he goes, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to pay the hospital $20 a month for the next 3 years. And we had owed him over $40,000. So he took a $40,000+ bill and reduced it to $3,600. The attorney for the hospital jumps up and says, that's unacceptable. And the judge claps his hands and says, good, we got a deal. So we went back in the courtroom. He entered the verdict or the judgment. And so on the way driving home, I decided, I think I'm going to go to law school. And but this is how naive I was at the time. I'd never heard of a patent at this time. So it's like, well, what do you do with an engineering degree and a law degree? So I started researching it. It's like patent law. I said, okay, I'll become a patent attorney. So that's how I ended up getting into patent law.
Tim, that's one of the best stories I've ever heard on how someone becomes a patent attorney. Start out playing baseball, and look how things turned out so well for you.
Yeah. So hence the title of the blog. As a baseball player, I turned out to be a pretty good patent attorney. And I've had a good career. I've been doing patent law now for 32 years, and am very grateful of the twists and turns my life has taken to get me to where I'm at today.